Alrighty, so we're going over the number line, sign numbers, and all this and all that. We got to learn the rules. So, as you all know, calculators exist in this world, right? Calculators exist in this world, and they are helpful. But it is important that you guys also know a little basic understanding of how some numbers work. In this case, negatives, right? Why is it that something negative plus something positive equals whatever number comes out, right? So that's why this week we're going to try to avoid our calculators and learn all the trickeries with integers, positive and negatives. And the first thing to start off with is the number line. Who here knows what the number line is? Yes, that's correct. Nobody said anything, it's fine. The number line is exactly what it is, a number line, right? And we have our whole lives dealt with this right here. What we are going to learn is this right here, the negative side to the number line. There's a negative side, right? The middle is always 0. We know that. But for some people, less than 0 is a concept that's kind of hard to grasp, right? It's because they probably haven't worked with negatives. I've worked with negatives before in real life when my bank account went below 0. Yeah. But it's important to know that on that 0 mark, from that side up is all positives, and from that to the left is all negatives. It's really, really important to know that. So this is how numbers work. We have an operation like this. 4 minus 6. Pretty simple. You start here at 4, right? And all you got to have in your head is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Negative 2. It's important to not do in your head, it's important to not do in your head 6 minus 2. 6 minus 4. Because then that comes out positive 2. We're now entering the world in which it's important that your answer comes out correct. Negative 2 is different from 2. Those are two different answers. You will be marked wrong if you give me an answer of 2 instead of negative 2. Those are two different answers. So you could have this in your head, the number line, right? Or you could have money in your head. You have $4 in your bank account. You withdraw 6. You have negative $2 in your bank account now, right? You could have money in your head. It's fine. You could have all of this to help you. But, you guys, what happens when we're given numbers that are huge? Like we're talking about, what's a good example? You know what? Even more complicated. A number like negative 10 minus, 16. Minus 16, right? The last thing you want to do always is, if you're not allowed to use a calculator, and for those of you taking your GED, the first 5 questions you are not allowed to use a calculator, so be prepared to get questions like these on those GED, the first 5 questions on the GED. The last thing you want to do is just take out a scratch piece of paper, draw your number line, do your ticks, going all the way up to 20 or something, and having to do this method of going, negative 10 over here, you minus 16, you keep on going, The last thing you want to do is that. You want to actually use some rules to your benefit. And that's what we're going to go over today. 4 adding and subtracting numbers, and multiplying and dividing numbers. So we're ready to learn these rules. This, I'm pretty sure you guys can figure out. If you have negative $10 in your bank account, you withdraw 16, how much do you have? But then this might throw you off right here. What does that equal? 6. Why? Because this becomes a positive. I'm going to explain all that right now. But for some of you, I'm pretty sure you're like, what? How does that create 6, right? So, we ready to learn our cheat sheet? We ready to learn our rules? You guys might want to write down the rules, because it's going to be extremely, extremely helpful in trying to get this quiz, 100% on this quiz at the end of the week. Boom, boom, and boom. So I could print this out for you guys if you want at the end of the day. It's not a big deal. But here we have some cheat sheets. Some cheat sheets, good. Good, we got one. We got one. So here's the cheat sheet. This is what it says. It says, when you are adding integers are just numbers, positive and negatives, right? If you have a problem in the middle, if you have a problem but in the middle is an adding symbol, you're going to want to use this right there, this section rule, all of this right there. It says, if your numbers have the same sign, you add and keep the sign. That's easy. You guys have messed with that your whole lives. What's 6 plus 3? You add, which is 9, and you keep the same sign. Well, what's the sign of this 6? Positive. What's the sign of this 3? Positive. So you keep the same sign, a positive 9. It's invisible. You won't ever see your answer, positive 9. But we know a standalone number is always going to be positive, right? So that first one, easy. We've dealt with that our whole lives. But look at this one right here. What happens if they have different signs? The rule says, subtract and keep the sign of the bigger number. I should have gone back. I'll go back to that in a little bit. So looking at this one right here, different signs. Subtract and keep the sign of the bigger number. So if we're given something like this right here, they might have something like that. The parentheses don't really mean much. Let me just do that right there. What did the rule say? Subtract and keep the same sign. So what's 5 minus 4? Or what's the difference between 4 and 5? What's the sign of the bigger number? It's a positive, right? 5 is the bigger number. So you keep the sign, which is positive. You just leave it alone. You don't have to put a plus or anything. 1 is the answer. And that's important. This is a nice little trick because, again, you guys could do it in your head. Oh, I have negative 4 in my bank account. I deposit 5, I have $1, right? Or some of you might draw that little number line, do the little ticks, put your dot at negative 4 and move it 5 places. But that's fine and all. But what happens if we're given the big numbers? What if we're given the last thing you want to do is resort to counting the bank account numbers, Last thing you want to do is resort to drawing out the number line. Let's use this rule. I'm adding integers. Are my numbers same sign or different sign? So guess what? One's a positive, one's a negative. So I'm going to use this second rule right here. I'm going to subtract and keep the sign of the bigger number. What's 53 minus 28? I should give it a little space. What's the symbol, what's the sign of the bigger number? It's a positive, right? That's two positive examples that we did. I want to get one with a negative. I'm going to do that next. But yeah, the bigger number is 53. It has a positive sign, so it stays 25. Negative 72 plus 16. Negative 72 plus 16. So, if you notice, we're adding. Both my numbers have a different sign. So I'm going to use this second rule right there. Subtract and keep the sign of the bigger number. What's 72 minus 16? No. Just 72 minus 16. Don't think of any negatives right now. Don't think of anything. What is it? Sure. What's the sign of the bigger number? 72 is the bigger number. It has a negative, so guess what? My answer is negative 56. You see how handy that rule is? So now, very quick, as a class. What's the rule when adding integers with different signs? Keep the sign of the bigger number, right? Now, I did go over the first rule pretty quick. I said, what was the example? 4 plus 5, right? We deal with that on a daily basis. But I did not go over what happens when you have two negatives. That was this first rule. I kind of rushed through it, and I forgot that the whole point of this is to go over negatives, right? So we know what 4 plus 5 is, right? Same sign, add them up, and keep the sign of both signs, of both numbers, right? But what happens when you both have negatives? Well, same thing. If you're adding, if you notice they both have the same signs, all you must do is add and keep the sign. That's a rule. So what's 4 plus 5? What's the sign of both of the numbers? The answer is negative 9. If you notice, we're adding. Both have negatives, so they both have the same sign. What does the rule say? Add and keep the same sign. So, what's 63 plus 72? What? 135? Sure. What's the sign of both numbers? So you just throw it on. It's 135. These are rules that you guys must remember. Oh, that's what we're moving on to right now. That's what we're moving on to right now. So you asked, what if it wasn't an addition sign? You asked, what if it was a subtraction? So it looked something like that. Right? Well, that's when you use your second set of rules. The subtraction sign, the subtraction rules. The subtraction rule is pretty simple because there's only one rule. Keep, change, change. So if you ever see in a subtraction sign, and you see a whole bunch of integers everywhere, a whole bunch of negatives everywhere, who cares? You just must always have in your head, keep, change, change. Keep, change, change. That's the rule of subtracting integers. This is what I mean. What you do is you keep the sign of the first number. Just keep it the way it is. Just rewrite it. You keep it, the next symbol, the operation symbol, you change. What does this change into? It's only one other option, positive, right? Positive and negative. So far we have keep, change. Now comes the last one, change. What does negative 72 become? Did you guys see what I did? Keep, change, change. Why do we do that? Because, for some strange reason, we love these rules. And all we wanted to do was convert it into an addition problem. Because now you get to ask yourself, okay, it's an addition problem now. Both my numbers have different signs. So, what was my rule when adding integers with different signs? Subtract and keep the sign of the bigger number. You see why these rules are helpful? You guys got to memorize these rules. So, let's subtract. What does this become? We had already come up with it last time. Yeah, oh yeah, no. The last time we did adding. So, what's the difference, or what's 72 minus 63? Did we do the last one wrong? What's the sign of the bigger number? So that's the one you copy over. In this case, you don't have to do anything. 9 is my answer. So pretty much, what do you do with subtraction? You keep, change, change. We do that just because we want it as our addition problem, because that's when all of these rules come into play. Did that make sense? It's helpful with these big numbers. Let's do one more example with subtraction. We have something like this here. Something more simpler. So some of you, I should use bigger numbers, but I'm just going to do this just for the heck of it, smaller numbers. Some of you might be able to know the answer, right? You think of your bank account and whatnot. You have negative $15 in your bank account. You take away $5 extra. How much do you have in your bank account now? Right? But how about we do the keep, change, change rule and see how it even works here, just for the heck of it. Because these are rules. They could be applied to anything. Let's keep, change, change. Let's keep this the way it is, negative 15. Let's change the operation sign into a positive sign. Let's change this positive 5. It's technically a positive 5, believe it or not. Let's change it into a negative 5. So now, what rule is this? Well, yep, it's the adding integers with the same sign. That's this one right here. Same sign. Add and keep the sign. We got to use that rule right there. So guess what? We're adding now. They both have the same signs. We use that exact rule. What's 15 plus 5? What's the sign that they both shared? It's negative 20. Earthquake. No. It's just probably the vents that's moving the projection. It's cool. So, keep change. It works whenever you have a subtraction sign.
Yeah, it's just crazy because to me, I would see that 15, negative 15, I owe $15 in the bank. I got $5, and when I add it, I only owe 10. But the way you put it again, because of the rules, makes it I owe 20, which is not cool.
Which is not cool. Exactly. So it's important that we nail down these rules. You're not helping yourself if you take these worksheets home and you whip out the calculator at home and you start doing negative 20 plus negative 5. Boom, answer done. Negative 16. You're not going to help yourself. Learn the rules, because we aren't going to use a calculator in the quiz this week, right? But again, this is the adding and subtracting rules for integers. There is two other rules. Two other operations I meant, with their own rules. Do we remember what those are? Multiplication and division. I'm pretty sure, believe it or not, multiplication and division is actually a lot simpler. It actually is, and I'm going to show you that. That's why it takes less to explain. Let's go here. There it is, right there. When multiplying integers, you know what? You don't even need that. How about I write it out for you? I'll write it out for you because it's a lot easier. It's the famous rule that we all grew to love. Positive times a positive equals what? Negative times a negative equals positive. Positive times a negative equals negative. A negative times a positive equals negative. These are the rules. What's the shortcut to memorizing these rules? Pretty simple. The ones that have the same rules are always going to be positive. I mean, the ones with the same signs are always going to be positive. The ones with opposite signs are always going to be negative. Yeah, but in life you're not always going to carry around the little note that you created. You guys must have this in your head. Now, this rule is for multiplying and dividing. It's for both. Now, how does it work in action? This is why I say it's easy. This is why I say it's a lot more simpler. It's because there is no changing of this. There is no same sign of this and blah, 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 blah. There is none of that. It's just straightforward to the, they cut straight to the chase. What is negative 3 times negative 6? Well, how do you solve integers with multiplication? Easy. Ignore the signs, you guys. Ignore it. Just do the operation of the numbers. What is 3 times 6? Then you go back and you ask yourself, a negative times a negative is what? Guess what? That's your answer, 18. That's how simple it is. So it works for everything. What is negative 4 times positive 2? Well, ignore the signs. What's 4 times 2? And then go back and look at the signs. What's negative times a positive? It's negative 8. It works for everything. Division. This rule applies for division as well. What is negative 10 divided by negative 5? Well, again, ask yourself, about the numbers itself. What's 10 divided by 5? Then ask yourself, let me look at my signs. A negative times a negative divided by a negative, I should say, is what? So guess what? That's my final answer, 2. So all you guys have to have in your head is, what's my operation, first of all? I'm going to do the actual operation of the numbers, all right? And then go back and ask yourself, all right, my signs, what was it? A positive times a positive equals a positive. Negative times and divided by a negative is a positive. So guess what? My answer is a positive 2. Just go back after you do the actual raw operation of the numbers. Did that make sense? Cool. So yeah, remember this rule, because that is for multiplication and division of numbers, positive and negative numbers. And definitely remember these rules, because these are meant for adding and subtracting positive and negative numbers. If you're adding numbers, if they happen to have the same sign, add and keep the same sign. If they have different signs, find the difference and keep the sign always of the bigger number. When you see a little subtraction sign in the middle, keep, change, change. And that'll change it always back into an adding problem. And then you just decide again of the two, whether they have the same signs or they don't, but whatever. You follow one of those 2 rules. So very quick, as a class, what's the rule for adding integers with the same sign? Add the numbers and keep the same sign. Adding the numbers is important.
Probably.
And it's actually going to be important for the quiz to say exactly that. Winky wink, that's all I'm going to say, right? As a class, what is the rule for adding integers with different signs? Subtract the numbers, so find the difference of the numbers, and keep the sign of the bigger number. That exact phrase. Remember those phrases, you guys. What is the rule for subtracting integers? That's all you need to know. Keep, change, change. What's the rule for multiplying and dividing integers? Positive times a positive, positive. Negative times a negative, negative. Positive times a negative, negative. Negative times a positive, negative. Just always have that in your head. Alrighty. Any questions? Good.